Her sleeve caught on the teapot handle while serving his morning tea, revealing bruises she tried to hide. The maid stammered an excuse about being clumsy, but the Mafia boss noticed the terror in her eyes. What she didn't know, he just decided she was under his protection, and nothing would stop him from keeping that promise. Sebastian Mordvinov didn't believe in accidents. At 7:15 a.m., he sat in his private office overlooking the Moscow skyline, reviewing intelligence reports that would overwhelm most analysts. But Sebastian wasn't most analysts. He was a man who noticed everything: the micro-expression before betrayal, the half-second pause before a lie, the way fear makes people's shoulders curve inward when they think no one is watching. So when Susanna Kalinina walked into his office carrying his morning tea service, he noticed immediately. Her sleeve was pulled down too far. Not just down, deliberately stretched over her knuckles, gripped in her fist like she was trying to hold herself together. Or hide something. "Good morning, Mr. Mordvinov," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It always was. In the 4 months she'd worked here, he'd never heard her speak louder than necessary. "Morning, Susanna." He watched her approach his desk, her movements careful, practiced, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She set the porcelain teapot down with both hands, and that's when it happened. Her sleeve caught on the handle. Just for a second, maybe two, but it was enough. Dark purple bruises wrapped around her wrist like a brand. Some were fresh, deep violet and angry. Others were fading to that sickly yellow-green color that meant they were several days old. And they're unmistakable even in that brief exposure, the clear impression of fingers. His eyes caught them before she yanked her sleeve back down. He saw her freeze. She knew he'd seen. "Susanna," he said calmly, setting down the file he'd been reading. "Sit down." "Oh, I should return to the kitchen." "Sit." It wasn't loud. Sebastian never needed to be loud. But something in his tone, the absolute certainty, made people understand that refusal wasn't an option. She lowered herself into the leather chair across from his desk, looking like she wanted to fold into nothingness. "What happened to your wrist?" "Nothing, sir. I'm just clumsy." She forced a laugh that sounded like something breaking. "I caught it on the pantry shelf yesterday while reaching for supplies." Sebastian leaned back in his chair, studying her. Susanna was 26, he knew from her employment file. Slender, with dark blonde hair always pulled back in a severe bun and gray-green eyes that rarely made direct contact. She was thorough, quiet, and she never asked questions. Those were the qualities his head of household, Galina Petrova, had praised when recommending her. But Galina hadn't mentioned the fear. Because that's what Sebastian saw now. Not embarrassment about clumsiness. Fear. Raw and visceral. "Both wrists?" he asked gently, noticing how she was unconsciously gripping her other forearm. Susanna's face went pale. Yes. I'm very clumsy." "Show me." "Mr. Mordvinov, really, I'm fine." "Susanna." He kept his voice soft but immovable. "Show me." Her hands trembled as she slowly pulled back her sleeves. Both wrists bore identical marks. Finger-shaped bruises. Someone had grabbed her, held her, with enough force to leave impressions that would last weeks. Sebastian felt something cold and precise settle in his chest. He had built an empire in the gray spaces between law and power. He'd done things he wasn't proud of. Made decisions that kept him sharp through long, sleepless nights. But he had rules, lines he didn't cross. And one of those lines was absolute: you didn't hurt people who couldn't fight back. Someone had hurt Susanna. Someone had grabbed this woman hard enough to leave marks that told a story of sustained violence, and she was terrified enough to protect them with lies. Who did this? No one. "I told you." "Susanna." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to understand something. You work in my house. Under my roof. That means you fall under my protection. Do you understand?" She looked at him with those haunted eyes, and for a moment he thought she might trust him. Her lips parted slightly, and he could see her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to determine which danger was greater. Then she stood up abruptly. I really should get back to my duties. The breakfast service. Susanna. But she was already backing toward the door. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Mordvanov. I'll be more careful. And then she was gone, practically fleeing from his office. Sebastian sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person in this household he trusted as much as himself. Galina. My office. Now. 3 minutes later, his head of household appeared. Galina Petrova had managed the Mordvanov estate for 15 years. She was 58, sharp as a blade, and one of the few people who wasn't afraid to tell Sebastian when he was wrong. You called, she said, closing the door behind her. Susanna. Tell me everything you know about her. Galina's expression shifted immediately to concern. What happened? She's injured. Bruises on both wrists. Finger marks. She's terrified, and she's lying about it. Bozhe moi. Galina sank into the chair Susanna had just vacated. I didn't know. I swear, Sebastian, I didn't know. What do you know about her personal situation? Not much. She keeps to herself. Galina's mouth pressed into a thin line. I know she was in a relationship that ended badly. She needed work urgently when she applied, I could see it in her eyes. Good references from her previous employer, a family in St. Petersburg. They relocated to London, and she couldn't follow. Why did she need work urgently? Galina shrugged. Difficult breakups are expensive. She mentioned once that she was staying with a cousin temporarily, trying to rebuild her life. Sebastian's fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare tell of tension. I want surveillance. Have Dmitri follow her after her shift today. Discreet. I want to know where she goes, who she encounters, if anyone is watching her. You think it's the former partner? I think someone grabbed her hard enough to leave evidence on her skin, and she's too afraid to report it. He met Galina's eyes with absolute clarity. No one touches my people, Galina. No one. Galina nodded slowly. She'd seen this side of Sebastian before, the protective calculation that engaged when someone under his care was threatened. For all his ruthlessness in business, Sebastian Mordvanov operated by an unwavering code. I'll speak with her, Galina offered. Perhaps she'll feel safer confiding in another woman. Do it carefully. She's already frightened. Sebastian turned back to his computer, but his mind had already shifted entirely. And Galina, have security pull all external camera footage. Every angle. Going back 2 weeks. You think someone's been following her here? I think, Sebastian said quietly, that Susanna Kalinina is running from something. And I intend to find out exactly what. After Galina left, Sebastian sat alone in his office, the intelligence reports forgotten. Outside his window, Moscow was waking up, people heading to work, living their normal lives, unaware of the darker currents that ran beneath the city's surface. Somewhere in the city, someone had hurt Susanna, had grabbed her, terrorized her, made her believe she had no recourse, no protection, nowhere to turn. Sebastian Mordvanov picked up his phone again, this time calling his intelligence coordinator. Victor, I need a complete background workup. Priority classification. Susanna Kalinina, currently employed in my household. I want everything, previous addresses, known associates, any police reports, restraining orders, legal filings. Anything that might explain why she's living in fear. He paused, his voice dropping to that particular tone that meant the order was absolute. And Victor? This stays completely off book. No one knows we're looking. Sebastian Mordvanov had learned to read silence before he learned to read power. In his world, the things people didn't say were often more valuable than the things they did. A pause before answering meant calculation. Averted eyes meant deception. And fear, real fear, had a particular quality that couldn't be faked or hidden, not from someone who'd spent 30 years studying human behavior like other men studied financial markets. His reputation had been built on this skill. While other men in his position relied on violence and spectacle, Sebastian operated through observation and precision. He noticed when a business partner's hand trembled slightly during negotiations, a sign of desperation that could be leveraged. He caught the micro-expression of contempt that flashed across a politician's face before the smile, valuable information about true loyalties. He saw the way people positioned themselves in a room, who they unconsciously leaned toward, who they kept at a careful distance. This attention to detail had kept him alive when louder, more aggressive men had fallen. It had allowed him to build an empire that operated in the spaces between legality and shadow, always just out of reach of those who might want to destroy it. And it had given him a code, a set of rules that he followed with the same discipline he applied to everything else in his life. One of those rules was simple: people under his roof were untouchable. Staff, associates, even the contractors who came to repair the estate's infrastructure, they all fell under an umbrella of protection that Sebastian considered sacred. It wasn't sentimentality. It was order. A system worked when everyone in it understood the boundaries, and one of his boundaries was that no one in his employ would ever be harmed without consequences that would be swift, absolute, and final. So when Susanna Kalinina had walked into his office that morning, he'd been running through his usual morning routine, reviewing overnight intelligence, checking financial movements, analyzing potential threats to his operations. It was 7:15 a.m., the time he'd maintained for 15 years, because routine created clarity and clarity created control. But the moment she'd entered, something in his peripheral awareness had flagged. Her posture was wrong. Not just the careful movements he'd observed over the past 4 months. Susanna was always careful, always precise, but something deeper. The way she held her arms closer to her body than usual. The way her sleeve was pulled down past her knuckles, gripped in her fist. The way she avoided his eyes even more thoroughly than she normally did. And then the sleeve had caught, and he'd seen what she'd been hiding. The bruises told a story. Fresh ones overlaying older ones meant this wasn't a single incident. The finger-shaped impressions meant someone had grabbed her, held her, used physical force to restrain or control her. The pattern on both wrists suggested she'd tried to pull away and been held tighter. Sebastian had seen violence before. Had ordered it when necessary, though always with specific purpose and measured application. But there was a difference between strategic violence in a world where everyone understood the risks and this, the deliberate brutalization of someone who had no defense, no recourse, no power. That difference mattered to him. It was the line between order and chaos, between a code and anarchy. And someone had just crossed it. Susanna Kalinina had learned to make herself invisible. It was a skill she developed over the past 8 months, refined through necessity until it had become as natural as breathing. She moved through the Mordvinov estate like a shadow, present but unnoticed, efficient but forgettable. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, her presence minimal. The less attention she drew, the safer she felt. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Her routine was precise, almost ritualistic. She arrived at exactly 6:45 a.m., entering through the service entrance with her head down. She changed into her uniform in the staff quarters, always checking that the sleeves covered her wrists completely, always making sure the high collar concealed the fading marks on her neck. She prepared the morning tea service with mechanical efficiency, the same porcelain pot, the same cup, the same exact arrangement on the silver tray. Routine meant predictability, and predictability meant fewer questions. She'd perfected the art of being present without being seen. When she cleaned the main rooms, she waited until they were empty. When she passed other staff members in the hallways, she offered the smallest possible smile and kept moving. When Galina Petrova asked how she was settling in, Susanna's answer was always the same. Very well, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Gratitude was a shield. Politeness was armor. And silence was survival. But this morning, everything had shattered. The moment her sleeve had caught, The moment those bruises had been exposed, she'd felt her carefully constructed invisibility collapse. She'd seen Sebastian Mordvinov's eyes register the marks, seen the shift in his expression from routine morning business to something else, something focused and dangerous. And when he'd asked her to sit, when he'd used that tone that made refusal impossible, terror had flooded through her like ice water. Because she knew what happened when powerful men took an interest. She knew what came after concern. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly, painfully, repeatedly over the past 8 months. The lies had come automatically, muscle memory from months of practice. I'm clumsy. I caught it on the pantry shelf. I'm very clumsy. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but they were necessary. They had to be. Because the truth was impossible. The truth was dangerous. The truth would get her killed. When Sebastian had asked who did this, she'd felt her throat close. For one terrible, desperate moment, she'd almost told him. Almost let the words spill out the name, the violence, the helplessness, the nights spent wondering if this would be the time he went too far. But then reality had crashed back. Men like Sebastian Mordvinov didn't protect people like her. They used them. They owned them. They traded them like currency in whatever games they played with each other. So she'd fled his office, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the hallway wall to steady herself. She'd retreated to the kitchen and forced herself to focus on the breakfast dishes, scrubbing each plate with the same mechanical precision she applied to everything else. But even as she worked, she could feel it, the weight of his attention, the knowledge that he'd seen what she'd tried so hard to hide. And beneath that, deeper and more terrifying, was the question she couldn't stop asking herself. What would he do now? Dmitry Volkov had been conducting surveillance for Sebastian Mordvinov for 12 years, and he'd learned that the most important observations happened in the spaces between action. It wasn't what people did that revealed the truth, it was what they did when they thought no one was watching. He picked up Susanna Kalinina's trail at 4:17 p.m. when she exited through the service entrance of the Mordvinov estate. She moved quickly, her head down, shoulders curved inward. Not the walk of someone heading home after work. The walk of someone trying not to be noticed. Dmitry followed at a careful distance, using techniques refined through years of practice. He blended into the foot traffic, changed his position frequently, never looked directly at her. Just another person navigating the Moscow streets in the fading winter light. Susanna took the metro, standing near the doors, her bag clutched tight against her chest. She got off at Novokuznetskaya and emerged into a neighborhood of Soviet-era apartment blocks, the kind of area where people minded their own business and kept their curtains closed. She walked 3 blocks, turned left, then stopped. That's when Dmitry saw it. The hesitation. She'd paused at the corner, her head turning slightly, checking behind her. Not casually. Deliberately. Like someone who expected to be followed. Then she continued walking, but faster now, and Dmitry noticed something else. She took an indirect route. 2 unnecessary turns. A doubling back that made no sense unless you were trying to lose someone. This wasn't paranoia. This was practiced evasion. She finally entered a tired-looking building with peeling paint and a broken security camera over the entrance. Dmitry made note of the address and settled in to wait. He didn't have to wait long. 17 minutes after Susanna entered the building, a black Mercedes pulled up across the street. Expensive. Out of place in this neighborhood. The kind of vehicle that announced its owner had money and didn't care who knew it. A man got out. Mid-40s, heavily built, with the particular swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating others. He wore a leather jacket despite the cold, and when he moved, Dmitry caught the telltale bulk of a weapon at his hip. The man lit a cigarette and leaned against the car, his eyes fixed on the building's entrance. Waiting. Dmitry photographed him from 3 angles, then pulled out his phone and sent the images to Victor, Sebastian's intelligence coordinator, with a single word, identify. The response came back within 8 minutes. Victor was efficient. Alexei Konstantin Volkov, enforcer, connected to the Berezovsky network, political and criminal ties. Multiple assault charges, all dismissed. Currently employed as security consultant for various officials. Dangerous. Protected. Dmitry read the message twice, then photographed the Mercedes's license plate. He watched as Alexei Volkov finished his cigarette, dropped it on the pavement, and ground it out with his heel. The man checked his watch, looked up at the building one more time, specifically at a window on the 3rd floor, then smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Then he got back in the Mercedes and drove away. But Dmitry understood what he'd just witnessed. This wasn't surveillance. This was a message. Alexei Volkov wanted Susanna to know he was there. Wanted her to see him, to understand that distance meant nothing, that she could run but never hide. Dmitry sent one more message to Victor. Target confirmed. Subject is being stalked. Recommend immediate escalation to Mordvinov. The first thread had been pulled, and the pattern it revealed was worse than anyone had anticipated. Victor's full report arrived on Sebastian's desk at 11:47 p.m. It was thorough, detailed, and deeply troubling. Sebastian read it twice, his expression growing colder with each page. Alexei Konstantin Volkov wasn't just a thug. He was a thug with infrastructure. The man had started as muscle for various criminal enterprises in his 20s, distinguishing himself through a particular talent for violence and an apparent immunity to consequences. Assault charges that mysteriously vanished. Witnesses who suddenly refused to testify. Evidence that disappeared from police custody. By his 30s, Alexei had evolved into something more valuable, an enforcer who could operate in the gray space between criminal networks and political power. His current employer, at least on paper, was a security consulting firm called Sentinel Solutions. In reality, Sentinel Solutions was a shell company that provided cover for a network of connections spanning organized crime, corrupt officials, and businessmen who needed problems solved quietly. Alexei's particular specialty was intimidation, making people cooperate, making them disappear, making them understand that resistance was futile. The financial trail was sophisticated. Alexei maintained multiple accounts, received payments through layered transactions that obscured their origins, and had assets protected through offshore structures. He lived well. The Mercedes was leased through a corporate entity. His apartment in a prestigious district was owned by a trust, his lifestyle funded through mechanisms designed to be untraceable. But what made him truly dangerous was the protection. Victor's report included a list of cases that had been opened against Alexei over the past decade. 7 assault charges. 3 allegations of stalking. 2 accusations of extortion. 1 suspected homicide. Every single one had been dismissed, dropped, or buried under procedural technicalities. The pattern was clear. Alexei had powerful allies. Prosecutors who wouldn't pursue cases. Police who wouldn't investigate. Judges who ruled in his favor. Politicians who provided cover. He operated within a system that had been carefully corrupted to ensure he remained untouchable. Victor had also uncovered Alexei's connection to Susanna. They'd been involved 8 months ago. What had appeared to be a relationship had quickly deteriorated into something else entirely. Susanna had tried to end it. That's when the violence had started. She'd filed a police report. It had been dismissed within 24 hours, no investigation conducted. She'd attempted to get a restraining order. The judge had denied it, citing insufficient evidence despite the photographs she'd submitted showing injuries. She'd tried to use the system. The system had failed her. Or more accurately, the system had been weaponized against her. Since then, Alexei had been hunting her methodically. He'd found her at 2 previous jobs, forcing her to quit both times. He'd shown up at her cousin's apartment regularly enough that Susanna had moved out to protect her family. He'd made it clear through actions and presence that there was nowhere she could go that he wouldn't find her, no authority she could appeal to that would protect her. Sebastian set the report down and looked out at the Moscow skyline. The city glittered in the darkness, beautiful and cold. Alexei Volkov believed himself untouchable because, until now, he had been protected by corruption, shielded by power, enabled by a system that valued influence over justice. But Alexei had made one critical miscalculation. He'd followed Susanna to the Mordvinov estate. He'd violated someone under Sebastian's protection. And Sebastian Mordvinov played by different rules entirely. Galina brought Sebastian the additional documentation the next morning. She'd spent the night pulling records through contacts in the civil courts, police departments, and social services. What she'd assembled was a portrait of institutional failure so complete it bordered on complicity. The first police report had been filed 8 months ago. Susanna had gone to the local precinct with visible bruises on her face and arms, photographs documenting the injuries, and a detailed statement about Alexei's escalating violence. The responding officer had taken her information, filled out the initial paperwork, and promised an investigation. That report had been closed 72 hours later, with a notation that read simply, "Insufficient evidence to proceed." Complainant declined to pursue matter further. Except Susanna hadn't declined. Galina had found a follow-up inquiry Susanna had submitted 2 weeks later, asking about the status of her case. That inquiry had received no response. It sat in a file marked resolved, buried under administrative codes that made it effectively invisible. The restraining order request had been even more telling. Susanna had appeared before a judge with medical records, photographs, witness statements from neighbors who'd heard altercations, and a detailed history of Alexei's pattern of behavior. The judge had reviewed the materials for less than 10 minutes before denying the request. The official reason given: petitioner failed to demonstrate imminent threat. Relationship disputes do not meet threshold for protective order. Relationship disputes. As if systematic violence was a matter of incompatibility. Galina's contacts had revealed something else. 3 other women had filed complaints against Alexei over the past 5 years. Different precincts, different jurisdictions, but the same pattern. Reports taken, investigations opened, then mysteriously closed. One woman had been pressured to recant her statement. Another had been told her case didn't meet prosecutorial standards. The third had simply disappeared from the system entirely, her complaint vanishing as if it had never existed. Sebastian studied the documents spread across his desk. Each page represented a moment when the system could have intervened. Should have intervened. Each stamp, each signature, each bureaucratic notation was evidence of a machine that had been carefully calibrated to protect predators instead of victims. There were phone records showing Susanna had called a domestic violence hotline 4 times. She'd contacted a legal aid organization. She'd reached out to a women's shelter. Each avenue had led to the same conclusion: without police cooperation, without judicial support, without institutional backing, there was nothing they could do. They could offer sympathy, resources for starting over somewhere else, suggestions to stay safe. But protection? Justice? Those required a system that functioned. And this system had been broken deliberately. Alexei's connections weren't just influential, they were embedded in the machinery itself. A prosecutor who owed favors. A police commander who took bribes. A judge who valued political relationships over legal obligations. Each piece carefully positioned to ensure that men like Alexei could operate without consequence. Susanna had tried everything a citizen was supposed to try. She'd reported the crime. She'd sought legal protection. She'd documented everything, followed every procedure, appealed to every authority. The system had responded by making her invisible. Sebastian looked up at Galina. She did everything right. Yes, Galina said quietly. And it meant nothing. Galina found Susanna in the laundry room 3 days later, folding linens with mechanical precision. Her movements were automatic, practiced, but Galina noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she worked. The older woman closed the door quietly behind her and approached with the careful gentleness one might use with a wounded animal. Susanna, we need to talk. I have work to finish, Mrs. Petrova. The work can wait. Galina pulled up a chair and sat down, positioning herself at eye level rather than standing over the younger woman. Mr. Mordvinov knows about Alexei Volkov. The stack of linen Susanna had been holding fell to the floor. Her face drained of color so quickly Galina thought she might faint. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. No, please, you can't, he can't. Susanna, listen to me. You don't understand. Susanna backed against the wall, her breathing rapid and shallow. If he finds out that anyone knows, if he thinks I told someone, her voice broke. He'll kill me. He promised he would. He promised. Galina remained seated, keeping her voice calm and steady. You're safe here. Mr. Mordvinov has already taken measures. Safe? Susanna's laugh was hollow, edged with hysteria. There is no safe. Don't you understand? I tried being safe. I went to the police. He has friends in the police. I filed reports. They disappeared. I got a lawyer. Alexei found out where the office was and waited outside until I was too terrified to go back. The words started pouring out now, months of suppressed terror finding release. I moved 4 times. 4 times. He found me every single time. I changed my phone number. He got the new one within days. I stayed with my cousin. He showed up at her children's school. At their school, Mrs. Petrova. So I left to protect them, and he still finds me. He always finds me. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't seem to notice. He told me exactly what he would do if I ever spoke to anyone. He described it in detail. He made me repeat it back to him so he knew I understood. And then he showed me photographs of the last woman who tried to run from him. Do you know what those photographs showed? Galina's throat tightened, but she remained silent. She's still alive, Susanna continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's the worst part. He didn't kill her. He just made sure she would never have a life again. Never walk again. Never. She couldn't finish the sentence. I reported him 7 times, Susanna said, sinking to the floor, her back against the wall. 7 times I trusted the system to protect me. And 7 times it protected him instead. So when Mr. Mordvinov says I'm under his protection, what does that mean? What can he possibly do that the law couldn't? What makes him different from every other powerful man who promised to help and then? Her voice finally broke completely. If I speak, he'll kill me. If I run, he'll find me. If I fight back, he'll destroy everyone I care about. There's no winning. There's only survival. And some days I'm not even sure there's that. Sebastian listened to Galina's account of the conversation with his hands steepled in front of his face, his expression unreadable. When she finished, silence filled the office for a long moment. She believes we'll fail her, he said finally. Just like everyone else has. Can you blame her? Galina's voice carried an edge of anger, not at him, but at the situation. The system taught her that power protects itself. That men like Alexei are untouchable. Sebastian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Moscow skyline. He'd built his empire on calculated force, knowing when to apply pressure, when to demonstrate strength, when to make examples. Violence had always been a tool in his arsenal, used sparingly but effectively when necessary. This situation demanded something different. Victor wants permission to handle this directly, Sebastian said. He's proposed 3 separate scenarios. All of them involve Alexei Volkov disappearing permanently. And you said no. I said no. Sebastian turned back to face her. Because Susanna has already lived through enough violence. Because making Alexei vanish doesn't dismantle the system that protected him. And because he paused, choosing his words carefully, because true power isn't about who you can destroy. It's about what you can rebuild. Galina studied him. In all their years working together, she'd seen Sebastian order ruthless responses to threats against his organization. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal in a way that transcended his usual calculations. So, what's the alternative? Sebastian returned to his desk and opened a file. Inside were documents Victor had compiled over the past 72 hours, financial records, communication intercepts, network maps showing Alexei's connections to corrupt officials, shell companies, money laundering operations. The infrastructure that made him untouchable. Alexei Volkov has protection because he's valuable to powerful people. He moves money, he solves problems, he maintains connections between criminal enterprises and political figures. Remove that value and the protection evaporates. You're going to expose him. I'm going to expose the entire network. Sebastian spread the documents across his desk. Every corrupt official who dismissed Susanna's reports. Every judge who denied her protection. Every prosecutor who buried evidence. The shell companies that fund them. The transactions that connect them. The criminal enterprises they enable. Galina leaned forward, studying the web of connections. This will take time. Weeks, maybe months. And if Alexei suspects, he won't. Because we're not going after him directly. We're going after his foundation. His financial sources. His political protection. His criminal connections. We dismantle the structure quietly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left holding him up. And Susanna? Stays under protection here. Full security. Dmitry maintains surveillance. We ensure Alexei knows that approaching the estate means consequences he can't avoid, even with his connections. Sebastian's voice hardened. He can watch from a distance. But he doesn't touch her. Not while we work. Galina was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that mattered most. Will this give her justice? Sebastian met her eyes. It will give her something better. It will give her proof that the system can be held accountable. That powerful men can fall. That she wasn't wrong to seek help, the system was wrong to fail her. He gathered the documents, his decision made. Violence would be faster. Easier. More satisfying in the short term. But it would also prove Alexei's worldview correct, that power is just violence with better resources. I intend to prove something different. What's that? That precision defeats brutality. That strategy outlasts force. And that the code of this house means protection without possession, justice without bloodshed. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning when a forensic accountant working for the Federal Tax Service received an anonymous package. Inside were detailed financial records showing that Judge Konstantin Petrov, the same judge who had denied Susanna's restraining order, had received payments totaling 3 million rubles over 18 months from a shell company registered in Cyprus. The transactions were meticulously documented, including dates that corresponded exactly with case dismissals in Petrov's courtroom. The accountant forwarded the information to the investigative committee. By Thursday, Judge Petrov was suspended pending investigation. The second domino fell 4 days later. A journalist at Novaya Gazeta, known for investigative work on corruption, received encrypted files detailing how Sentinel Solutions, Alexei's employer, was operating as a money laundering front for a network connecting organized crime figures with government contracts. The files included communication logs, banking records, and a network map showing money flowing from criminal enterprises through Sentinel Solutions to political campaigns and offshore accounts. The journalist published the first article on Sunday. By Monday morning, 3 prosecutors had been reassigned, 2 police commanders were under internal investigation, and Sentinel Solutions bank accounts were frozen. Victor had orchestrated it with surgical precision. Each revelation appeared to come from different sources, a whistleblower here, an audit there, a routine investigation that had uncovered unexpected connections. Nothing pointed back to Sebastian. Nothing suggested coordination. It looked like the natural consequence of corruption finally catching up with itself. But the real genius was in the sequencing. Each exposure created pressure that made the next target vulnerable. Judge Petrov, facing criminal charges, began cooperating to reduce his sentence. His testimony implicated 2 prosecutors who'd buried assault cases, including Susanna's. Those prosecutors, suddenly exposed, started pointing fingers at the police commanders who'd taken bribes to close investigations prematurely. The network that had protected Alexei was devouring itself. Each member scrambled to save themselves, offering up others in exchange for leniency. Loyalty evaporated under the pressure of potential prison sentences. Alexei himself remained untouched, watching his entire support structure collapse around him. Sebastian had been deliberate about that. Let him see it coming, let him understand what was happening, but be powerless to stop it. The third week brought the financial collapse. With Sentinel Solutions under investigation and its accounts frozen, the money stopped flowing. Alexei's salary disappeared. His corporate apartment lease was terminated when the holding company was dissolved. The Mercedes was repossessed when the shell company leasing it was exposed as part of the laundering network. More critically, his value to the remaining corrupt officials plummeted. Why protect an enforcer who could no longer move money, no longer provide cover, no longer connect criminal enterprises to political power? The calculations were cold and immediate. Alexei Volkov had become a liability. The final domino fell when one of the women whose complaint had been buried, encouraged by news of the investigations and promised protection, came forward again. This time, her case was assigned to a prosecutor eager to demonstrate integrity in the wake of the corruption scandal. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued. Alexei Konstantin Volkov, once untouchable, was now wanted for assault, stalking, and witness intimidation. His shield had been dismantled piece by piece, and he'd never seen Sebastian's hand in any of it. The news broke on a cold morning in late February. Moscow woke to headlines that dominated every major outlet: corruption network exposed, dozens implicated in justice system scandal. The story had everything: corrupt judges, complicit police, money laundering, political connections. But buried in the coverage, for those paying attention, was a smaller detail: the arrest of Alexei Konstantin Volkov on multiple charges of assault and stalking. For most readers, he was a footnote. For Susanna, watching the news in the estate's staff room, he was everything. She stood frozen in front of the television as the footage played, Alexei being led from an apartment building in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. The man who had haunted her for 8 months, who had promised he was untouchable, who had made her believe there was no escape, was being pushed into a police vehicle while cameras recorded every moment. The reporter's voice narrated the scene. Volkov, a so-called security consultant, faces 7 counts of aggravated assault, multiple stalking charges, and witness intimidation. Prosecutors say he operated with impunity due to corrupt relationships with officials, many of whom are now under investigation themselves. With his protective network dismantled, authorities expect additional victims to come forward. Galina appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's over. Susanna couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. The man who had controlled her life through fear was being treated like what he actually was: a criminal. Not protected, not immune, not untouchable. Just a man who had broken the law and would finally face consequences. How? She finally whispered. Justice, Galina said simply. Delivered the way it should have been from the beginning. Later that morning, Sebastian called Susanna to his office. She entered hesitantly, still unable to fully comprehend the shift in her reality. Sit, he said, his tone gentler than usual. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. Alexei Volkov will be prosecuted, Sebastian said directly. The evidence against him is substantial. More importantly, the network that protected him no longer exists. The system that failed you has been forced to account for its failures. Susanna felt tears building, but fought them back. You did this. The system did this to itself, Sebastian replied. Corruption has consequences. It just needed the right pressure applied at the right points. He slid a folder across the desk. This contains contact information for legal advocates who will help you through the prosecution process if you choose to participate. Also included are resources for trauma counseling, relocation assistance if you prefer to leave Moscow, and a reference letter for future employment. You're letting me go? The words came out smaller than she intended. I'm giving you choices, Sebastian corrected. You can stay. You can leave. You can testify against him or choose not to. These are your decisions, not mine. Protection doesn't mean ownership, Susanna. It means ensuring you have the freedom to decide your own future. For the first time in 8 months, Susanna felt something she'd almost forgotten: agency. The power to choose. The right to determine her own path without fear dictating every decision. She looked at Sebastian Mordvinov, the man whose reputation was built on ruthlessness, and saw something she hadn't expected to find in Moscow's underworld. She saw someone who understood that true power wasn't control. It was liberation.